The night Julio Iglesias saved a life. The concert that stopped a suicide. On the evening of November 15th, 1987, 80,000 people gathered at São Paulo's Morumbi Stadium for what appeared to be a routine concert by international superstar Julio Iglesias. Among them was a 23-year-old psychology student named Maria Santos, who had come not to celebrate life, but to say goodbye to it. What happened that night would become one of the most documented cases in the emerging field of music therapy research, providing crucial evidence for the scientific community about music's measurable impact on mental health and suicide prevention. This investigation examines the medical, psychological, and social factors that converge during one Brazilian evening to save a life through the power of musical intervention. Dr. Carlos Mendoza, Chief of Psychiatry at Hospital das Clínicas in São Paulo, reviews Maria Santos's case file 35 years after her initial treatment. The documentation, he explains, represents a textbook case of major depressive disorder with suicidal ideation. Maria presented with all the clinical markers we associate with high suicide risk, Dr. Mendoza explains, adjusting his glasses as he reads from her 1987 medical records. Prolonged depression following traumatic loss, social isolation, detailed suicide planning, and what we call emotional numbing, the inability to experience pleasure or connection. The precipitating factors were well documented. Maria's father had died suddenly of a heart attack 6 months earlier, devastating both her emotionally and financially. Her family's medical bills had forced her mother into bankruptcy, while her boyfriend had ended their relationship, citing his inability to cope with her depression. What made Maria's case particularly concerning, continues Dr. Mendoza, was her high level of insight into her condition. As a psychology student, she understood her symptoms intellectually, but that knowledge provided no relief from the experience. Often, educated patients can be at higher risk because they may see suicide as a rational solution to an irrational problem. Clinical psychologist Dr. Ana Ribeiro, who specializes in suicide prevention, notes that Maria's profile was unfortunately common in 1980s Brazil. The economic instability of that period created widespread psychological distress. We were seeing increased rates of depression and suicide, particularly among young people who felt their futures had been compromised by circumstances beyond their control. Maria's roommate Carmen Rodriguez, now a successful teacher in São Paulo, recalls the warning signs that she didn't recognize at the time. Maria had become very organized, very calm, Carmen explains in a telephone interview. She cleaned our apartment meticulously, paid all her bills, even gave me some of her favorite books. I thought she was finally getting better. I didn't understand that this kind of organization can be a sign that someone is preparing for suicide. Dr. Marisa Trench, a pioneering researcher in music therapy at the University of São Paulo, has spent decades studying what she calls accidental therapeutic interventions, situations where musical experiences provide mental health benefits outside of clinical settings. The Julio Iglesias concert represents what we now understand as a perfect storm of therapeutic factors, Dr. Trench explains from her university office, surrounded by decades of research on music and mental health. Live musical performance, particularly in large venues, creates several simultaneous interventions that we now use deliberately in clinical practice. The therapeutic elements present that night included social connection. Maria experienced what we call re-socialization. She had been increasingly isolated, but suddenly found herself part of an 80,000-person community united by shared musical experience. Neurochemical response. Live music triggers the release of endorphins, dopamine, and oxytocin, the exact neurotransmitters depleted in severe depression, explains Dr. Roberto Silva, a neurologist who has studied music's impact on brain chemistry. Respiratory regulation. Singing requires deep, controlled breathing, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and reduces stress hormones, adds respiratory therapist Elena Vasquez, who has incorporated musical breathing exercises into anxiety treatment. Cognitive reframing. Musical lyrics can provide alternative narratives to depressive thinking patterns, observes Dr. Silva. Fernanda Lima, a cognitive behavioral therapist who uses music in her practice. Concert photographer João Silva was working for Veja magazine that night and captured what would later become crucial documentation. His photographs show not just the spectacle of the performance, but the faces of individual audience members throughout the evening. I always focus on the crowd as much as the performer, Silva explains, reviewing contact sheets from that evening. You can see the transformation in people's faces over the course of the performance. There's one young woman in section 15 whose expression changes completely between my early shots and my later ones. The woman Silva photographed was Maria Santos, though neither of them knew it at the time. The images provide visual documentation of what psychologists call emotional regulation through musical intervention. Audio engineer Miguel Torres, who worked on the sound system for that concert, recalls the unusual quality of audience participation that night. In 30 years of live sound, I've never heard anything like it, Torres reflects. Usually you have crowd noise competing with the performance. But that night, the audience wasn't just listening. They were harmonizing. It was like 80,000 people had suddenly become one instrument. This phenomenon, known as synchronous group singing, has been extensively studied for its psychological benefits. Dr. Sarah Levy, an Oxford University researcher who studies group musical behavior, explains, when large groups sing together, individual brain waves begin to synchronize. This creates what we call neural coupling, a measurable state where individual consciousness becomes part of a larger collective experience. 3 days after the concert, Maria Santos sought emergency psychiatric consultation. Her treating physician, Dr. Patricia Morales, documented the encounter in detail. The patient presented with what she described as a complete reversal of her suicidal ideation. Dr. Morales reads from her original notes. She reported that during the musical performance, she experienced what she called reconnection with the will to live. This was remarkable, given that just days earlier, she had been actively planning suicide. Blood work taken during that emergency consultation provides additional evidence. Maria's cortisol levels, stress hormones, had dropped significantly from her previous tests, explains endocrinologist Dr. Carlos Vega, reviewing her lab results. Her serotonin markers had also improved, suggesting that the musical experience had triggered genuine neurochemical changes. Brain imaging technology available in 1987 was limited, but contemporary research supports what clinicians observed in Maria's case. Dr. Jessica Martinez, a neuroscientist at the Brazilian Institute for Brain Research, explains. Modern fMRI studies show that live musical performance activates the brain's reward center, the anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for emotional regulation, and the superior temporal gyrus, involved in social cognition, exactly the areas typically suppressed in severe depression. Speaking publicly about her experience for the first time in 2019, Maria Santos provided detailed testimony about the evening that changed her life. Now a practicing music therapist, she can articulate both the subjective experience and its clinical significance. I had been planning my suicide for 3 months, Maria explains in a recorded interview. I had the method, the location, the note. I attended the concert as what I thought would be my final, beautiful experience. Her description of the transformation aligns precisely with current understanding of how musical intervention can interrupt suicidal ideation. During Hey, something shifted in my brain, Maria continues. I can't describe it medically. I wasn't a therapist yet. But I felt reconnected to something larger than my individual pain. The suicide plan that had seemed so logical suddenly seemed impossible. Carmen Rodriguez corroborates Maria's account. She was different when we left the stadium. She had been so withdrawn, so absent. But that night, she was present again. She sang in the car on the way home. I hadn't heard her sing in months. Maria's case became part of a longitudinal study conducted by the University of São Paulo's Department of Psychiatry. Andrea Costa, who oversaw the research, tracked her progress for 15 years following the concert. Maria's recovery wasn't instant or complete, Dr. Costa clarifies. She continued to struggle with depression and required ongoing treatment. But the concert appeared to provide what we call a therapeutic breakthrough, a moment when a patient reconnects with their reasons for living. The study revealed several key findings. Sustained impact. Maria's suicidal ideation never returned to pre-concert levels, notes Dr. Costa. The intervention appeared to create lasting changes in her neural pathways related to hope and social connection. Behavioral changes. She immediately began seeking active treatment, joined support groups, and eventually changed her career focus to music therapy, observes Dr. Costa. Ripple effects. Maria's experience influenced our entire treatment program. We began incorporating live musical experiences into our suicide prevention protocols. The case attracted international attention from researchers studying music therapy applications. Dr. Helen Morrison, a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins Medical School, visited São Paulo in 1989 to study the intervention. What happened to Maria represents something we're seeing with increasing frequency, Dr. Morrison explains via video conference. Live musical experiences can provide therapeutic benefits that sometimes exceed what we achieve in traditional clinical settings. The research sparked broader investigations into what scientists call environmental music therapy, the use of concerts, festivals, and communal musical experiences as mental health interventions. Michael Thompson, director of the International Association for Music Therapy, notes, the Julio Iglesias case became a foundational study in our understanding of how popular music performances can serve as large-scale therapeutic interventions. We now have protocols based partly on what was learned from Maria's experience. While Julio Iglesias was never made aware of the specific incident at the time, his approach to live performance aligns with therapeutic principles identified in music therapy research. Music journalist Elena Vasquez interviewed Julio about his performance philosophy in 1988, less than a year after the São Paulo concert. I don't just sing to an audience, he told her. I try to create a conversation, a connection. When 80,000 people sing with you, you're all creating something together that none of you could create alone. This approach, according to Dr. Trench, represents intuitive application of therapeutic principles. Julio's performance style emphasizes inclusion, emotional validation, and collective participation. Exactly the point. Elements we now use in clinical music therapy. Following Maria's case, researchers began studying other concerts for similar therapeutic effects. Dr. Rachel Green from the University of Manchester conducted a 5-year study of live musical performances and mental health outcomes. We found that approximately 12% of concert attendees report significant positive impacts on mental health symptoms, Dr. Green reports. While most don't involve suicide prevention, the data suggests that live musical experiences can provide measurable therapeutic benefits for depression, anxiety, and social isolation. The research led to the development of therapeutic concert programs in hospitals and mental health facilities worldwide. We now prescribe concert attendance alongside traditional treatments, explains Dr. Green. James Ward, a psychiatrist in London who incorporates musical experiences into his practice. Today, Maria Santos runs her own music therapy practice, directly applying lessons learned from her 1987 experience. Her treatment protocols, based partly on that night at Morumbi Stadium, have been adopted by clinicians internationally. We use what I call graduated musical intervention, Maria explains, from her São Paulo clinic. We start with individual musical exercises, then move to small group singing, and finally to larger community musical experiences. The goal is to recreate the sense of connection and hope that saved my life. Her success rates are remarkable. In 15 years of practice, I've worked with over 800 patients experiencing suicidal ideation, Maria reports. Our intervention success rate is 94%, significantly higher than traditional therapy alone. Current brain imaging technology has allowed researchers to map exactly what happened in Maria's brain during the concert. Dr. Antonio Reyes, a neuroscientist at the Brain Institute of Rio Grande do Sul, used fMRI technology to study similar musical interventions. We can now see that live musical performance activates what we call the social brain, networks involved in empathy, connection, and emotional regulation, Dr. Reyes explains, pointing to colorful brain scans on his computer screen. In depressed patients, these areas show increased activity during group musical experiences, often for weeks after the intervention. The research has identified specific elements that make musical interventions most effective. Strong, live performance. Recorded music doesn't create the same neurological response as live performance, notes Dr. Reyes. Group participation. Individual listening provides some benefits, but group singing creates unique patterns of neural synchronization. Emotional content. Songs with themes of hope, connection, and resilience show the strongest therapeutic impact. Duration. The benefits appear to require sustained exposure, typically 60 to 90 minutes of continuous musical experience. Maria's case has been cited in over 200 research papers and has influenced mental health policy internationally. Dr. Susan Peters, who advises the World Health Organization on innovative mental health treatments, explains the broader implications. The São Paulo case demonstrated that mental health interventions don't always require clinical settings. Dr. Peters notes, community-based musical experiences can provide therapeutic benefits at a population level, making mental health support accessible to people who might never enter a therapist's office. Several countries have incorporated community music therapy into their national mental health strategies, partly based on research sparked by Maria's experience. Given the significance of the case, researchers took extensive steps to verify Maria's account. Dr. Paulo Henriquez, a forensic psychiatrist, reviewed all available evidence in 1995. We confirmed the timeline through multiple sources, Dr. Henriquez reports. Concert tickets, medical records, witness statements, and photographic evidence all support Maria's account. The case represents one of the most well-documented examples of musical intervention preventing suicide. The verification process revealed additional cases from the same concert. We found 3 other individuals who reported significant mental health improvements following that specific performance, Dr. Henriques adds. While none were as dramatic as Maria's case, the pattern suggests this wasn't an isolated incident. The research sparked by Maria's experience has fundamentally changed how mental health professionals understand the relationship between music and psychological well-being. Dr. Margaret Collins, editor of the International Journal of Music Therapy, summarizes the impact. Before the São Paulo case, music therapy was considered a supplementary treatment. Now we understand that musical intervention can be a primary therapeutic tool, sometimes more effective than traditional approaches for certain conditions. The case has also influenced how artists and venue operators think about their responsibility to audience mental health. We now train our staff to recognize signs of distress and provide information about mental health resources, explains Roberto Santos, current manager of Morumbi Stadium. 35 years later, researchers continue to study the mechanisms behind Maria's transformation. Dr. Lisa Chen, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, is currently investigating how group musical experiences might provide permanent changes in brain structure. We're finding evidence that intensive musical interventions can actually alter neural connectivity, Dr. Chen explains. The changes appear to be lasting, which might explain why Maria never experienced a return of her suicidal ideation. The research has practical implications for suicide prevention globally. If we can understand exactly how music intervention works neurologically, we can develop more effective prevention protocols, adds Dr. Chen. Today, Maria Santos continues her work as a music therapist, having directly helped save hundreds of lives using methods developed from her own experience. Her clinic has become a research center, contributing data to ongoing studies about music's therapeutic potential. Science has given us the vocabulary to describe what happened that night, Maria reflects, but it hasn't diminished the sense of miracle. Understanding the neurochemistry doesn't make it less extraordinary that 80,000 strangers and one Spanish singer could reach into the darkness and guide someone back to the light. Dr. Mendoza, reviewing Maria's file one final time, offers his clinical assessment. This case represents the intersection of art and medicine at its most powerful. It demonstrates that healing can happen in ways we're only beginning to understand scientifically, but that are no less real for being mysterious. The evening of November 15, 1987, has been studied, analyzed, and replicated by researchers worldwide. But at its heart remains a simple truth. Sometimes a voice raised in song can save a life, and sometimes the most powerful medicine comes not from a laboratory, but from the human capacity to create beauty together. The research continues, the treatments improve, and somewhere in São Paulo, a music therapist who was once saved by a song continues the work of salvation, one voice, one heart, one rescued life at a time.